you. Thank you a lot.
Recording in progress.
Yes, I'm going to. It's okay if I remove my mask? Okay. To show my mouth and my nose.
Sorry, let me just make sure that everything is fine.
Yes, perfect. So first, I would like to thank a lot Professor Claudio Azio and Romain Morenzi for the invitation to talk about some objects, mathematical objects we use in physics. The big difference between mathematics and physics, we use mathematics in physics, but we give a precise meaning to the objects, which is not usually the primitive meaning we have in mathematics. So here it will be only a play with 2x2 real matrices. And little and little, that will give the opportunity to present some fundamental aspects of quantum formalism. So this work, this presentation is based on the first, what happens? What happens? What I did? Yes, here. It's based on this paper, which was published 2 years ago in the Brazilian Journal of Physics with my collaborator Hervé Bergeron and 2 professors from the CBPF in Rio, Evaldo Corrado and Ligia Rodriguez. And there is a new work which has been prepared last month and which has been submitted with Roberto Beneducci from the University of Calabria, Emmanuel Frion, and Amedeo Peri. So this is the program. First, I will present the point in the Euclidean plane as quantum states. Afterwards, I will consider the time evolution in relation with rotation in the plane, and time evolution for closed systems and open systems. I will explain what it is. I will afterwards give an example of what I call a baby quantum measurement. And eventually, if I have some time, I will speak about entanglement and isomorphism. Okay? So here, in some sense, I'm covering practically all the mathematical background of quantum physics, but with a very simple object. And just as a preamble, I would like to insist on the fact in quantum information, at the present time, quantum measurement, quantum foundation, and so on, usually they are illustrated with just manipulation, simple manipulation, involving 2 simple matrices, which are called the Pauli matrices, sigma 1 and sigma 3. They are symmetric matrices with real coefficients. There is a third Pauli matrix, which has complex coefficients, which is an Hermitian matrix, which is called sigma 2. And I will show that only with sigma 1 and sigma 3, we can do already a lot of things. We can understand a lot of things in the formalism of quantum physics. And I will show you that this kind of toy model is not actually really a toy model. There is something which is a lot deeper behind that. So first, when we speak about state in quantum physics, and when it is preceded by the adjective pure, it is commonly understood within quantum formalism as a unit ray in Hilbert space. What is a unit ray? It's an equivalence class of vectors. They differ from each other just by the multiplication by what we call a phase factor, an element of the unit circle, the unit, an element of the set of complex number of modulus 1. Now, most of the Hilbert space in quantum physics are complex and infinite dimensional. Here, we are going to adopt a fully minimalist position by playing with the model, the first model of non-trivial model of Hilbert space. It is just the Euclidean plane. So here I put also a sentence by Feynman. Feynman was telling in many conferences that no one is going to understand really quantum mechanics. But he is at the same time telling that on a mathematical level, quantum mechanics does not use complicated things. Just algebraic operations, simple algebraic operations, and no differential equation, or at most only very simple ones. I don't agree with Feynman totally, because there is the main problem for understanding the difference between the classical mechanics, the classical model for a system, and the quantum model is the difference between the Cartesian product of two vector spaces and the tensor product between two vector spaces. And unfortunately, the physicists, when they write their equations, they don't make precise, you know, this, the existence of a tensor product. For them, it's completely obvious. But it's really the big difference. It's because we have a tensor product in quantum physics, we can speak about entanglement, about quantum information, and so on. So let's now go to the Euclidean plane. And in this context, a unit ray is an orientation associated with an angle which is between 0 and pi, or if you prefer, to a point of the upper unit semicircle, deleted of its left boundary point. Okay? Or if you prefer, unit ray is a set of parallel lines with polar angle phi, between 0 and pi. The set of unit rays is actually the coset of the unit circle by the subgroup G2, plus or minus 1. And I have a nice physical illustration of this set, just the protractor. On the protractor, you can see there is the external graduation is given by the set of angle between 0 and 180 degrees, but inside you have the inversion of the graduation, and if you put a sign minus, you get the equivalence between the two angles. It is exactly an illustration of the coset S1 by G2. So another point, I would like to make precise, you know, the notation used in quantum physics by people is the notion of quête en bras. So let's consider here the plane with two elements I and j of its orthonormal basis, and one vector, unit vector with angle phi, for instance, in this direction. So for unit vector, I will use the notation ket of phi, phi being the angle. So this vector, of course, has coordinates cosine phi, sine phi, it's a column vector, and in particular for the basis vector I, it will be the ket 0 or 1, 0, and for j, it will be the ket pi over 2. And the characterization of the orthonormal basis is the following. Norm is equal to 1, orthogonality, and resolution of the identity with coefficients which are equal to 1. When we write this resolution of the identity, of course, we write completely, I would say, trivial things. The identity matrix is equal to the projector, orthogonal projector along this axis, plus the orthogonal projector along the orthogonal axis. Okay? So we should remind that resolution of the identity coming from orthonormal basis in the plane. You can generalize this characterization in any dimension, it would be always the same. Okay? So now, you take, when we write the decomposition of unit vector in the plane along the orthonormal basis, actually, if I consider phi as a quantum state, this decomposition corresponds to the writing of wave functions in terms of its variable. But here, when we write in physics a wave function for states on the real line, usually we write a psi of x. And when I write the ket psi, it's just writing this decomposition in terms of an continuous set of eigendistribution, which are the ket x. Okay? And the value of this wave function here, in this case, this wave function takes only two values. The projection of the vector on the vector 0, it's cosine phi, and the projector of the vector phi over pi over 2 is sine phi. It's exactly the same as when we write the function, the wave function psi of x as the scalar product, the inner product of psi, the ket psi, with the bra x in the following way. It's just writing the decomposition of this function as in this way, where you just write here the scalar product between x and x prime, which is the Dirac x prime minus x. And this should be compared with what we call the unit circle representation of the pure states, when because you can decompose any vector ket phi in terms of the whole family of unit vectors by using this integral, and where you have just the scalar product between the inner scalar product between the two orientation, which is cosine phi minus eta. Okay? But this is a decomposition which involves actually what we called a positive operator valued measure, POVM, in the place of this decomposition, which involves what we call the projection valued measure, PVM. Here, in the decomposition, the basis vectors are orthogonal. Here in the decomposition, the basis vectors are not orthogonal. They form an over-complete family of vectors. So it's a difference between PVM and POVM. POVM is a concept which appears almost everywhere now in quantum information, but here you have a very simple example with the Euclidean plane. Another way to interpret, but I will skip that because maybe I prefer to go forward. We will come back about this. But just I want to give you an example of quantum formalism, which is applied to what we consider a classical phenomenon involving the polarization of the light. Where are the orientation, quantum orientation in the plane here? They are the direction of polarization. So when you have an electromagnetic wave which is not polarized, and which arrives at what we call a polarizer, at the exit of this polarizer, the electromagnetic wave, the wave plane, is polarized in certain direction. That means what is electromagnetic wave? It's a combination of electric field and magnetic field, which evolve in a periodic way in their respective plane, which are perpendicular to the axis of the propagation. Okay, so after passing the first polarizer, the wave is polarized in the direction of the in the direction which is imposed by the first polarizer. And if you put a second polarizer here, which has a polarization direction which is not the same as the first one, you will get at the exit only one part of the energy of your wave. And of course, you can extinguish completely the wave if this polarization direction is orthogonal to this one. Okay? So here, I will show you later that this simple phenomenon, which is known since the beginning of the 19th century, actually is an example of quantum measurement with objects which are states in the plane. So now, to pure states, that means unit ray in the plane, we make the correspondence with a projector, orthogonal projector in the plane, which is given by this matrix here. This matrix is what? Is the product of the Coulomb vector with the Rho vector. In Dirac notation, you write the things as I wrote at in the illustration, in the previous illustration concerning the Dirac notation. Here you have the ket, and here you have the bra. The ket is the Coulomb vector, a bra is the Rho vector. So that will give you this matrix, which is the orthogonal projector along the direction phi. But this, you can also construct this matrix by using the rotation matrix in the plane by an angle phi, by applying the rotation matrix on the ket 0, the axis I, and here by applying the inverse of the rotation, the transpose of the rotation, on the bra 0. Okay? Now, what is mixed states in quantum formalism? It is more general than pure states. Pure state is just an orthogonal projector. A mixed state is a combination of two projectors. The first one is this projector, this pure state, and the other one is a projector along a direction which is orthogonal to the first one. And with coefficients which are written in the following way: 1 plus r over 2, 1 minus r over 2, where r is between 0 and 1. And this is the most general mixed state or density matrix we can have in this framework of the quantum formalism on the plane. Okay? R phi, since phi is between 0 and phi, and r is between 0 and 1, actually you can map any point of the upper half unit disk on the set of density matrices or mixed states. Okay? So a mixed state is a symmetric matrix, non-negative, with trace unit. You can write in a different way by using the rotation matrix here, and by using also the third Pauli matrix, sigma 3. And also, if I introduce this specific mixed state, symmetric matrix, which is given by the linear combination of sigma 3 and sigma 1, the two real Pauli matrices in this way, with the angle 2 phi here, you will get again this specific mixed state with two parameters r and phi. And this observable, because we call that an observable, it's a symmetric matrix or a self-adjunct operator, is extremely used in any illustration of consideration about quantum entanglement and so on. Why? Because it's, I will speak a little bit more about this. If you consider the direction phi, here, the ket phi, as a quantum state, this quantum state, this vector, is an eigenvector of this matrix with angle 2 phi. Okay? Now, let's go to the polarization of the light. Just one slide to see the connection with this well-known phenomenon in electromagnetism. So I repeat, and when you consider a wave, electromagnetic wave, quasi-monochromatic, which propagates along this axis here, Z, okay? You have one electric field in the direction of the propagation, which is oscillating, and one magnetic field in the orthogonal direction to the electric field on the axis of propagation. Okay? But from this electric field, which has the following form here, maybe I should, I don't, I have a little problem to no, it's okay. Okay? So you have, because of with time, you have oscillation, and you have a factor which depends on the time also. So if I consider the coordinates of this electric field in the plane orthogonal to the direction of the propagation, that means Ex and Ey, we construct by using average value of the product of those two components, we construct like this a symmetric matrix. When we divide by what we call the wave intensity, it's exactly density matrix as it was defined in the previous slide. So under this kind of representation comes also from the 19th century. The middle of the 19th century, those parameters which appear here in the density matrix, they are called the Stokes parameter. From Stokes, who described the electromagnetic wave by using this kind of matrix. So you can see the quantum formalism actually was already present in what we call the classical physics. Okay, so here I can always write, as I did in the previous slide, this matrix in terms of, first, here you have the density matrix, which is a real density matrix, rho, with parameters r and phi. And, of course, here we play with complex number here. We have complexified electric fields. You have another term, a third term, where the second Pauli matrix, which is the only one which involves complex numbers, with a parameter A, and this parameter A describe what is called a circular polarization, while the parameters R and phi describe what is called the linear polarization. So, we can also understand those parameters, and specifically the parameter R, in terms of one object which is called von Neumann entropy, and which is also used a lot in quantum information. What is the von Neumann entropy in the context of quantum physics? It is this quantity. You take a density matrix here. You take this, it's a positive, it's a non-negative, so you can take the logarithm of this matrix. You take the trace of this product and you define by multiplying by the sign minus this quantity. And when you develop this quantity, in terms, you develop actually in terms of two probabilities which are actually connected with, in the simplest case, of Boltzmann-Gibbs or Shannon entropy for two outcomes. One with probability 1 plus R over 2, the other one with 1 minus R over 2. In this context, you describe actually, with the parameter R, the distance from some mixed state to a pure state or to a random state. If R is equal to 0, you get the maximum for this entropy, and in that case, you get just, the random, what is called a completely random state. And for R is equal to 1, what you get a pure state. So, let's continue a little bit about the statistical aspects and the connection with resolution of the identity. So if you consider now precisely the totally random mixing, for which the density states, the density matrix, is just the identity divided by 2. Okay? But this specific random state actually can be decomposed in a finite sum of orthogonal projectors which are oriented along the direction of regular polygons. So this formula, it's not so trivial, tells you that the identity matrix is the sum of those projectors, of those n projectors, which are not orthogonal here. So the fact they are not orthogonal forces you to put also this factor. So this decomposition tells you that totally random mixing is also the superposition of n pure states with probability affected with the probability 1 over n here. Or even you can, and I will also consider this decomposition for the description of POVM, you can also describe the decomposition of the totally random mixing in terms of a continuous decomposition of orthogonal projectors. Resolution of the identity through a continuous superposition of projectors. So that, the deep meaning of that is here. This multiple representation of the state describing totally random mixing provides one more illustration of a typical property of quantum mechanical ensemble in comparison with their classical counterparts. You cannot have that in classical physics. And also, this multiple representation is related to the safety of quantum protocols involved in quantum cryptography. It is impossible from the only knowledge of ρ0 to recover the pure states used to build it. Because you have as many decomposition you wish. So now, quantum observable. We spoke about quantum states. Quantum states which can be pure, which can be mixed. Now, the other aspect of quantum formalism is the aspect of observables. Observables in the sense we can observe by measurements characteristic of a system. So what is a quantum observable in this context? It's just a 2x2 real symmetric matrix, a self-adjunct matrix. Okay? And since any symmetric matrix has an orthogonal decomposition in terms of orthogonal projectors, it's a PV decomposition, PVM decomposition. I will write this decomposition here. Okay? So, NA A actually can be decomposed in the following way by using the identity times the average value of the two eigenvalues plus this observable sigma 2 phi. You can see it's not a rotation matrix because it's a symmetric matrix. I was also considering this matrix before. Here, you can use this matrix just to complete the expression of the quantum observable. So now I want to consider the time evolution of a state, quantum states or mixed states in quantum physics. Everyone has heard about Schrödinger equation, but actually there is a more general evolution equation in quantum physics which involves mixed states and from which you can derive the Schrödinger equation. But this one is a lot more general. It is in general termed as follows. You take one observable A of t, in general, self-adjoint operator, depending on time, and its evolution is ruled in the following way. It is the commutator of one object we call the specific observable, we call the Hamiltonian, with the observable AT, which is transported by using what we call the evolution operator, T0. Okay, this is a general jargon of quantum physics, where if you want really to know in which way your observable evolves, you have to know the Hamiltonian, you have to know the evolution operator, which is actually the exponential of this unitary exponential of these Hamiltonian operators, and you have to solve this equation. What is the situation in your case? In your case, we don't have actually any Hamiltonian because we don't consider any phase space here, Hamiltonian that comes from Hamiltonian mechanics and that comes from the existence of a phase space. Here, actually, we can introduce this expression, which will be a pseudo-Hamiltonian because it is not an observable, it is not a symmetric matrix, but it is expressed in terms of the Pauli matrix, symmetric Pauli matrix, which complex coefficients, time, watch, a function which has a dimension of frequency, of a frequency. And the corresponding evolution operator, actually, it's just unitary rotation in the plane, where here the angle depends on the time, and this angle is just the integral of this frequency function. So if we want to have something which is consistent with this equation. In the case of quantum formalism for the plane, we are forced to play with this operator for H and to introduce sigma 2. If we want to stay with the completely real formalism, it is very simple. We just remove any I, any imaginary complex number, and we introduce, instead of the pseudo-Hamiltonian, we introduce what we call the frequency operator, which is a real matrix this time, but which is proportional to this matrix 0, 1, minus 1, which is the product of sigma 2 by minus I. So in that case, the equivalent of the Dirac-Heisenberg equation, it's an equation which involves only real quantities. The Schrödinger equation, the corresponding Schrödinger equation will be written in this way with the frequency operators. And since now we have 3 real matrices, sigma 1, tau 2, sigma 3, these 3 real matrices are actually a basis for all symmetric matrices. This basis is the basis of the Lie algebra SL2R. Okay? So that the previous equation was for what we call a closed system. A closed system. Now for open system, there is an equation which is called the Lindblad equation, which involves a set of operators, which is a generalization of the Dirac-Heisenberg equation, which involves a set of operator Lk and the Lk dagger, the adjunct, and which form, with the identity, a basis of operators, and the coefficients are non-negative constants. This is an equation which becomes very used to describe, within the quantum formalism, open systems. What is the situation here? To describe, for instance, the evolution of a mixed state by using the frequency operator and by using the equivalent, the counterpart of those operators. This is the most general form in the context of the Euclidean plane of the Lindblad equation. Okay? So you can see it's not a very complicated differential equation for involving matrices, 2 by 2 real matrices. So the solution can be found through first the solution of this Riccati equation, and if you know the solution for phi, you know the solution for the parameter r. And immediately we are going to see why we called open system, because for an open system, you have a kind of degradation of the energy of the system, because it is open, there is an interaction with external world. And due to the non-negativeness of H1 and H3, the coefficient which appears in the equation here, sorry, so I think I have to go a little bit here. Yes. We see that when r goes to 0, that we see that the evolution of r with time will go to 0. That means any mixed state will go to a completely random mixed state. That means the von Neumann entropy of the open systems tends to its maximum at large time, as we can expect. Okay, you can see here, for instance, in this specific case, when h1 is equal to h3, the angle will behave like a closed system, but the behavior of R is this decreasing exponential. So now I want to finish, yes, with a quantum measurement in this context and the relation with polarization of the light. So for quantum measurement, I need two planes. One for the measurement apparatus and the other one for the system. So those two planes, if I want to consider together those two planes, I have to consider the tensor product of those planes. Okay? In this specific case, of course, the tensor product is the same as the Cartesian product. So one plane, I repeat, will be for the space of states phi m, ket phi m of an orientation pointer, for instance, for a polarizer. And here, if I will need the action of the matrix τ2, if you remember what it is here, on a ket phi m, it will give you the ket which is orthogonal to the first one. The second plane in quantum measurement will be the space of states phi s of the system. For instance, the linearly polarized state of the plane wave crossing the polarizer. So now, let us introduce the quantum observable, AS, to be measured. It acts on the state of the system, and it has spectral decomposition written in this way. Two eigenvalues and two orthogonal projectors corresponding to the two eigenvalues respectively. And the pointer is aimed to detect the parallel or horizontal orientation in the plane determined by the angle phi parallel and its orthogonal determined by phi orthogonal. Okay? So now I have to introduce your interaction between the pointer, or if you prefer, the polarizer, and the system, or if you prefer, the light, which is linearly polarized. Okay? So I suppose, and this is a type of what we call in quantum physics von Neumann quantum measurement, I suppose the interaction holds just at the time Tm. Of course, you can put some smooth function not to have an exact time, because the time in quantum physics is not something which is well defined. It's a classical parameter. It's not a quantum operator. Okay? So this interaction is the following one. It is the matrix τ2 for the pointer multiplied by the Dirac T localized at Tm, tensor product with the observable for the system which are going to be observed, which is going to be measured. So if you take the exponential of this of this interaction, you will get the following expression, which can be actually calculated explicitly due to a specific property. When you take the exponential, it's a specific of projector and the tensor product with the matrix τ2. If you take the exponential, you will get this decomposition. For this part, the rotation matrix with angle lambda, tensor product with a projector P, where the projector P, here in this case, will be one of the two projectors for AS. Okay? So if you apply this expression, this equality, to the calculation of this evolution operator, you will get this expression after interaction between the pointer and the system. You will get the sum of the rotation matrix at angle lambda parallel, tensor product with the projector on phi parallel, plus rotation corresponding to the second lambda eigenvalue lambda perpendicular for this observable tensor product with this projector. Okay? I remind that what we observe is this symmetry matrix here with two eigenvalues. So you will get here this decomposition here. And now we apply the evolution operator corresponding to the measurement or corresponding to the interaction between pointer and system. You apply to a specific initial system, which is described here. For the pointer, I choose, for instance, the orientation 0. And for the other one, some orientation phi s. I will get, by applying my evolution operator, this decomposition. And you can see the tensor product, you have two tensor products only. For this one, it is along the parallel orientation. For this one, it is along the orthogonal orientation. For this one, it will be the rotation corresponding to the first eigenvalue. For this one, it will be the rotation corresponding to the second eigenvalue. And what will be, in the context of interpretation of the quantum measurement, the probability of getting this direction here, this lambda parallel, which is measured by the pointer along this parallel, it is given by the square of this cosine. And conversely, if the measurement, what is the probability to obtain this eigenvalue, which is the second eigenvalue of the observable, will be the square of the sine. But this is exactly the Malus law 1808. So if you want a little bit more, you will want to know a little bit more about something we learn normally in a high school, just read that. It was at the beginning of the 19th century. The only known way to generate polarized light was with a calcite crystal. Using a calcite crystal, Malus discovered that natural incident light became polarized when it was reflected by a glass surface. So here you have a glass plate. You have your incident light. You have here, because of the interaction with the glass plate, we have a first polarization. And afterwards, you can detect the polarization by using a calcite crystal. You orientate your calcite crystal in order to measure the polarization of this beam here. Okay? You can completely extinguish this polarization if you rotate at a certain angle your polarizer. And the intensity of the reflected light varied from a maximum to a minimum as the crystal was rotated. That was observed by Malus. And Malus proposed that the amplitude of the reflected beam must be A is equal to A0 cosine theta. So it will be a periodic function in function of the angle theta, the angle of between the light and the plane. However, in order to obtain the intensity, which is actually the energy of your beam, Malus squared the amplitude relation so that the intensity equation, I theta, of the reflected polarized light was this quantity, cosine square theta. okay, times a constant. But it is precisely what we found here. So the question, which is actually a very important question, is linear polarization of light classical or quantum? There is no Planck constant here. The classical model is also a quantum model for polarization of the light. So you can see it's not necessary to present a complicated experiment in quantum physics. You have already this one. Usually, this experiment is presented with photons. But the concept of photons is already a quantum concept. A photon, what it is, a photon? It was invented at the beginning of the 20th century, telling that the light is also made of little pieces of energy, which were called the quanta, Planck quanta. And if the light has the frequency omega, the energy is h bar omega. H bar omega has a dimension of energy. But this is for the conception of the light as an assembly of particles. But here, in the case of polarization, the light is just considered as a wave, that's all. But a wave can be considered as well as a quantum object. And I think I have still a few minutes. I will not get through the last part, but you will have, of course, the slides. The last part is about entanglement, about tensor product, and so on. Also, you can do everything with planes, and tensor product of planes, and so on. So it's not necessary to introduce complex plane and so on. But in the last part, I will make the connection with complex plane here by precisely entangling here by doing a tensor product to real planes. As I did already for the quantum measurement. The quantum measurement involves the tensor product of the quantum of the plane for the pointer and the plane for the system. Okay? But here I will not have time really to develop that. Just I want to finish my talk. So if you're interested, I think it's a part which involves interesting observation concerning entanglement and Schrödinger cat and so on. Okay, I want to finish my talk by also referring to a recent paper with a PhD student I have in Burundi. His name is Celestin Abonimana, where you can find another way, another work in which we consider signal analysis as another side of the quantum formalism, where there is no Planck constant. Just we play with time, frequency, and in the last work which is in progress with Gilles Cohen-Tanouji, who is a specialist of high energy physics. He is the brother of Claude, who got the Nobel Prize in in quantum optics, and Juma Chabani and Celestin. Also, it's called the paper is called the Quantum Models à la Gabor for Spacetime. That means we can use this kind of technique where we don't have at all the notion of quantum field theory. Quantum field theory is adapted to fields where you consider at a certain moment particle associated with the field, with crashing, annihilation, and so on. But here, no, we just consider fields, and we have a quantum version of the field. For instance, we can quantize space-time metric in general relativity with interesting issue. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Thank you very much. I know students have to run to a meeting if somebody has a really urgent question, to a meeting with the director. So,
Okay.
So if they want to ask something, they are all online, but
Yes. Yes, because I didn't have a look on the possible questions. I don't know. In
but
which,
otherwise, just a message to the students who are still here. I mean, Professor Gazot will be with us also tomorrow, and I'm sure he will be happy to meet you on the terrace.
Okay.
So I can just speak to the remaining part of the audience and ask if there are any questions. Well, I have one curiosity from just mathematical. Of course, I don't even know if it makes sense to ask, but this distinction and this, I mean, what you try to conceive to us about the difference between the Cartesian product, the tensor product, and so on, all, and the kind of the way you explain to us this real versus complex formalism, how flexible it is in going out from the plane to other, maybe more interesting geometrical spaces. I mean, are there versions of this approach that would work for manifolds, two-dimensional manifolds? I mean, does it even make sense to ask these kind of questions, or this is a problem that actually starts and ends in R2? I mean, don't know, of course. I confess I don't know.
If you take a general manifold, it will not have a structure, a Euclidean structure. So we could, of course, consider some Riemannian manifold, but we must have, in order to make this formalism work in terms of interpretation, physical interpretation, measurement, and so on, you must have at a certain moment inner product. Inner product is absolutely fundamental. It's the reason why why Hilbert spaces have a central role in quantum formalism. Of course, you can extend that to Banach spaces and so on, but that become quite artificial in terms of measurement, because the measurement really comes from the projection of something on something. So if you don't have this structure of Hilbertian structure, of course you can always play with tangent space, tangent Hilbert space and so on, but I don't know at all where you can go.
Thank you. Any other question? Let's see. I'm not sure I can. If somebody has a question from online, please unmute yourself if you can. I don't know if.
Yes.
Oh, there are some messages in the chat. Let's see if we can read the chat.
Because I'm trying to see.
Oh, maybe.
Yes. Yes. I should have a look on that.
No, okay. It was just general comments. Somebody's thanking you, and somebody's congratulating. But I think it's, we can congratulate all together and thank.
It's not a bad comment?
No. Yeah, actually, it was quite risky to show it. Okay. So thanks you, Jean-Pierre, again.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.